are back on the Zero Hour. I am your host, Richard RJ Eskow, and joining us once again is our good friend, Thomas Frank. Thomas Frank, as you know, is the author of a number of books which you have read or should read, including What's the Matter with Kansas, Listen Liberal, and his latest, The People, No, A Short History of Populism. He is also a columnist for The Guardian, and his latest piece was headlined, If the Wuhan lab leak hypothesis is true, expect a political earthquake. This is such a rich topic. I couldn't wait to talk to him about it.
Yeah.
So, Tom Frank, welcome back to the program.
Richard, it's great to be here, but I just want to point out, first of all, that we're now allowed to talk about it. I mean, one of the first things you have to remember here is that we basically now live in a censorship regime. And you and I could have talked about the Wuhan lab leak theory privately a month ago, but you would not be able to go on YouTube and air a video about it.
That's right.
Some people know better than us, and they they determined that there could be no legitimate conversation on the subject by people like you and me.
Yeah, it's like being ruled by some sinister, technologically driven combination of Plato's guardians and the drunkest guy at the Chamber of Commerce banquet. You know,
with the tools of Stasi, which is what social media is. It's
right.
It's, and I think we should just take a second here to let that sink in to the viewers, because this is one of the things that intrigues me about this story, is how many different elements of the sort of, professional class consensus that we live under nowadays, the sort of the hegemonic ideas that we live under nowadays, how many of the elements of this thing discredits all at once.
That's the juicy part about it.
But do you remember, Richard, my last article for The Guardian was about censorship.
Right.
And and as often happens with these articles that I write for The Guardian, they get these enormous readership, enormous numbers of people reading them. And about half the people deny that this is even happening, or that the problem is happening. This is always the case, right? Well, you can't deny this anymore. We live under a censorship regime. They were censoring something that it would be like censoring conversations about the financial crisis and saying, no, you can't suggest that the big banks had anything to do with it.
Right. No, absolutely. And it's actually, you said with the tools of the Stasi, but it's actually much worse. I wrote a piece about it called Ma Bell with mind control, that it's actually as if you and I, we think we're having these conversations on Facebook or whatever. It's as if you and I were talking on one of those old rotary phones in the 1960s. And when I brought up the idea that this might be a lab leak, you never even knew I said it. The conversation just skipped 30 seconds. It's demonic. It's really
it's
awful.
The most. And this is so. Do you remember when Occupy Wall Street happened, and it was all organized with iPhones? And everybody at the time thought this was the most liberating invention in human history, because now you could organize these protests, and the police, you could run rings around the police, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But now we realize the real potential of this invention, which is that all of us can be surveilled constantly, and our speech can even be censored. It can be, there's an algorithm in Mark Zuckerberg's office that can just close all of us down. This is the real promise of social media, is mass censorship. And I'm here to tell you, it is embarrassing to me that my liberals are the ones that are supporting this and even calling for more of it. I mean,
they absolutely are. And it's, again, I keep coming back to this, but it's even worse than just, I was behind the Iron Curtain. They knew their news was being censored. We either don't know, or our liberals are cheering it on because they're saying it's fake news. But the ability,
I'm just referring to the liberals in Congress when they had Zuckerberg and the various other top brass from Silicon Valley, talking to them, they were trying to pressure them into censoring more, censoring not just COVID conversations. That actually seemed fairly benign. Censoring political conversations. That's the part that I just can't believe that this country would countenance that. And it's not like when I think about censorship in the old days, I think about members of the John Birch Society, or I think about parents who were angry at rock and roll music. No, this is my team is doing
Right.
this is your people, Richard. These are our friends who are demanding and getting more censorship. Anyhow, that's just the first point. That's just the tip of the iceberg here in terms of like the disastrous consequences of this thing. That's probably the least. I mean, that's the one part of my story that's got no attention at all because it's so far down the list, you know.
Well, that's it. And you know, by the way, not only is it people that, you know, are friends of ours, but it's you go down such a rabbit hole trying to talk about it with them, because at least I do, because I say, well, wait a minute, you know, I thought we didn't believe in censorship. And they'll say, oh, so you want Trump to be able to stir up murderous crowds that try to assassinate Congress. And then you want to say, well, those stories might have gotten a little exaggerated. Oh, now you're for the guy, the shaman with the horns who went into this. You know, I mean, it's a rabbit hole, which I think
it's incredibly scary that we have convinced ourselves that it's okay to censor political conversation as long as it's the other side. And I just want to remind you, we should go on and talk about the COVID lab leak theory, but for our team to give up on this and to openly embrace censorship out of the incredibly foolish belief that it will never turn around and bite them, right? That Trump and company are never going to be able to do this back to us. Oh my God. You have got such an incredibly rude awakening coming, my fellow libs.
Well, of course. Well, you know, they don't, well, but I'll tell you one, and we will get to the actual lab leak, but I will tell you, I think a lot of liberal friends, a lot of our posse would actually not mind and don't mind that the same tools are being used against the left. The economic
against people like you and me, no, they wouldn't mind that.
Yeah.
But what I mean is, it will happen to them too. It's basically the whole logic of anti-censorship from when we were kids. You know, the whole ACLU logic of standing up for speech, even that you disagreed with. That's lost. That doesn't make sense to people anymore. The partisanship and all that has gone so far, and it's so deep that none of that old ACLU crap means anything to people anymore. And look, here's the consequences of it. If this Wuhan lab leak, I just like what is happening now is so mind-boggling in terms of the potential consequences and what it reveals about the world that we live in. But if it turns out to be true that they were censoring,
accurate stories.
The truth about what went wrong in our world and why millions of people died and the economy of the world was thrown off the rails. I mean, in this incredible international calamity, and they wouldn't let us talk about it. My friend, that is nuts. There is it's like these companies need to go out of business immediately. Everyone that thought that the censorship was okay needs to lose their seats in Congress like tomorrow. And I'm even talking about like the guy that represents me. I mean, everybody. They all need anybody that had anything to do with this needs to pay the price. Okay, let's keep going here because it's not established yet. The whole basis of the article is what if it's true? What if it's true? We don't know if it's true. It's just that there's been all of these. The story starts with me reading up on, keeping up on my reading of scholarly magazines and whatnot, and realizing that, oh my God, this theory that everybody has been telling me is a conspiracy theory and is completely far-fetched, might in fact be true, and in fact might be the most plausible explanation for where COVID came from, that it escaped from a laboratory in Wuhan, China, that we know was experimenting with bat coronaviruses. Okay, and there's more and more evidence, and there's more and more articles, and now Dr. Fauci is saying it's possible. Joe Biden is saying it's possible. There's all of these newspapers that were calling it a conspiracy theory and flagging it as and doing these fact checks on it and saying, oh my God, they're all reversing course and admitting that this is possible. And so trying to stay one step ahead of this, I say, okay, what if it is? What if we finally get to the bottom of it, which we never will do, by the way? What if we get to the bottom of it and we discover that this is true? What are the consequences going to be? And my friend, I'm here to tell you that it is there is a social earthquake coming our way if in fact this is true, all through COVID. And in fact, well, going back even further than that, we have been, it was through the entire Trump era, I would say. The liberals have been in a kind of panic to shore up the expertise of experts, the power of the professional elite.
Right.
This is one of the sort of great themes of the period that we're living through. Remember, I wrote that book about populism and the people who hate it. And this is what they define populism as is like the rabble, basically. It's right. The opposite of politics run by experts. And the whole point of this era for people, for liberals, has been to suppress that and to raise up the figure of the expert, put that figure on a pedestal and bow down and do everything that these people say. And COVID for this particular worldview came as a kind of a godsend. I mean, COVID's terrible, right? And it's killing millions of people, but it forced us, remember they have those yard signs that say respect science,
Right.
COVID it forced us to do that. It forced us to respect science. And there were all of these articles, I quote from I think at least one of them, but in the original version of the story, I quoted from like 3 or 4 of them. All of these articles in the early days of COVID where some panicked newspaper columnist or Democratic member of Congress was talking about science as one in an earlier era would have talked about God.
Right.
Science is just, that we need to bow down and worship science. We need to pray for science. We need to do whatever scientists.
Right. You did have a quote.
We
right.
need to, and it's this sort of new theology. By the way, a little side note here, and just tell me when you want me to shut up, by the way, but one of the things that
trust me.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that I did during my COVID downtime was I read Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe.
I did too. Who could not, right? I mean, yeah.
Oh, it was really eye-opening. And one of the things that I mean, you have to wade through a lot of like verbiage to get to the eye-opening parts. But it's the famous metaphor. It's a distant mirror. It is you can recognize our behavior in this book, the hysteria, the panic, the social distancing, all of these things. But the one that got me was that that was the last time they had the bubonic plague in London, England. 1665 was the plague year. One of the things that very naturally occurred to people was that those who got it, those who died from the plague, in some way deserved it because of their blasphemy, or their idolatry, or their sinfulness, but usually their sins against God, their religious unfaithfulness. And was a constant theme in those days. And when I read that, it's like the light went on in my head. It's like, oh my God, that's what we are saying about the Red Staters. They don't listen to science. They don't bow down to the right household gods. Our household god now, of course, being expertise and science. Properly credentialed expertise.
And there's a third element to it, which is credentials. Credentials being the ordination, the priestly ordination into this club. Right. Now.
Well, that's right. So my expertise, I've discovered my expertise doesn't count.
Because you're a historian?
People, because I don't teach at a university. So that it doesn't matter to in the conversation. there's only certain kinds of credentialed expertise that matter, and there's a hierarchy, right? And if you're perceived as being an expert in certain ways, then you basically, everybody has to listen to you, and so on. And COVID reinforced that hierarchy. That was one of the things that made us embrace it. It seemed to be this hierarchy that is now for us tantamount to God, right? This is our religion. And COVID seemed to be, it seemed to be saying this religion is true. This religion is correct. This is the true faith. And those who have defied it, like Donald Trump and like these red state idiots going around without masks on and, playing around in the swimming pool or whatever it is, all these people that we scold, that they're getting what they deserve.
Right.
And
right.
Everything made sense. And now you say, well, wait a minute. If this is true, if the lab leak hypothesis is true, that whole what do you call it, edifice,
right,
is done for. It's going to be smashed into a million pieces. Scientists aren't the heroes; they're the culprits. If this thing is true, they're the culprits.
Well, I have a million thoughts, Thomas Frank. And I won't share all of them.
Do we have to break for a commercial?
No, we don't. Troy has to worry about that later, but where to fit that in. But I won't share all the million thoughts, but a couple of them. One is that it drives people like Sam Harris crazy when you use the word. That is. The atheist writer, Sam Harris. It drives people like that crazy if you use the word scientism. But it is a kind of theological belief in science.
I'm not talking about the scientific method. Nobody uses the word correctly. It's like populism. They just throw it's just this word. People don't mean the scientific method. No, I embrace the scientific method. That's me.
The scientific method is one of inquiry and discovery, which is not this absolute certainty,
not credentialism, not the hierarchy of credentialed expertise. That's something different. That's a form of idolatry.
How exactly? And how could we have known everything about a brand new disease? So we should have been approaching this with, we don't know, we want to learn. That's the scientific approach. But the fact is, there are a couple differences of nuance, I guess they might be, that I have with you. And one of them is this. I think the edifice is already destroyed, or should have been, merely by the revelation that it was possible. In other words, whether or not it turns out to be true, and as you say, we may never know, especially if it is true. But
there you go.
But the edifice should have been destroyed by the fact that not only did they say it was absolutely impossible and it was racist to suggest it, but it was so impossible that you should be censored and made invisible for saying so. Now they're saying, well, could be true. It reminds me of a very old joke and very long joke I won't tell about the guru on the mountaintop. But,
I thought you were going to go with the magic 8-ball. Could be true. Shake it again. Is true. Oh, my God.
And there's another very long Yiddish joke where, voice tells a guy to go to Las Vegas and bet all his money on this number, and he makes $500,000. He says, now double it, and he loses everything. And the voice says, so I was wrong. Science is doing that right now. It's like, hey, but that admission, whatever the final determination, if there is one, it turns out to be, that already destroys, or should have destroyed, the sense of certainty. But that gets me to my other nuanced difference with you, which is I don't think even if we find out that it was a lab leak after all, I think that like so many dogmatic belief systems, I think they'll find a way to just kind of close over it and pretend it never happened.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree with that. But look, don't try to out cynicism me, buddy. I am the most cynical guy ever. It's not the scientific method; it's the cynicism method. You just always look for the worst possible interpretation, and that's what you go with. That's my method. But
and for prediction,
I think you're exactly right. But let's keep talking about the different. I like the term that you use, the sort of dogmatic systems that we live with. These dogmatic ideological ways of looking at the world, and all the different elements of it that it shatters. Okay. And obviously professionalism and the whole worship of credentialed authority is like on the line. And that is, we're going to be taking a sledgehammer to that in the next couple of years. We talked about the media, who they've got egg on their face in a huge way. Silicon Valley, the whole censorship regime, all that is going to come crashing down. But there are so many interesting aspects to this. For example, the fact that lab leaks not only happen, they're fairly commonplace. They're predictable. We know that they're going to happen X number of times per 1,000 hours or whatever. The idea that we would just rule that out as being impossible is absolutely nuts. Oh, and then the conflicts of, so one of the things that got me about this, Richard, is reading this literature about the lab leak theory, starting to hear echoes of the last great global catastrophe, the financial crisis,
right.
The one that for you and me was so extremely important in the way we learned to think about the world, where you had professional group after professional group being compromised by conflicts of interest. In that case, it was like the bond, the people that did the bond ratings. It was the real estate appraisers, of course, Wall Street, but all of these different groups essentially bribing each other, corrupting each other, and right. Then the people who are supposed to be supervising everything being part of the same groupthink. I mean, the word that we're getting at here is groupthink. This is always the problem with these right. When you have these crises brought on by the professional elite, and everybody is thinking exactly the same, and they all turn out to be extremely vulnerable to, there's some shock to the system, like all of a sudden real estate prices don't go up anymore. One right. day they stop going up, and what do you know? Everybody has been investing in the same crooked thing, which was developed, this kind of these who called it financial weapons of mass destruction. It was like Warren Buffett or something. Basically, they were fiddling around with some stuff that they were growing in a laboratory also. And, and they were all these, advanced mathematicians with advanced degrees and stuff working on Wall Street, designing these in their little laboratory, designing these extremely complex securities, synthetic CDOs. Do you remember all this stuff? And
of course, yeah, sure.
Of course, the COVID pandemic puts that in the shade. We thought that was the worst, the biggest. As I said many times on many programs, including yours, the biggest event of our dumb century. We were in the century for 21 years, and the financial crisis was the big story. Well.
Right.
This one's bigger. This one's bigger. And the similarities. Okay, I'm shutting up.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to jump in, and Thomas Frank, I guess what I would say is this. First of all, just to clarify, I said earlier, we were told we were racist for contemplating the lab theory. Clearly, calling it the Chinese virus is a racist thing to do. We didn't call the 2008 financial crisis the white people on Wall Street crisis, right? Or the Lower Manhattan crisis. So if you want to label it.
We should have, maybe.
And probably, true, good point. And the vectors of transmission of this virus initially were global commerce. So we could call it the globalization virus. You could call it anything you want. But if it turns out that we could have also called it the science virus, that really, this was a lab experiment run amok.
Virus, yeah.
Which we were told was
true.
Now that's the part of this story that if it turns out to be true, a lot of people will have to do a lot of dancing to get out of their condemnations. Because to me, while we were told that, at least the way I interpreted it, that it was anti-racist to reject the idea that it came out of a lab, the fact is it was more, and I think your article goes a long way toward documenting that. It seems to have been more not protecting a racial respect, but a matter of protecting the interests of the scientific culture.
No, this is always what they do. Do you remember what my whole theory about Obama refusing to get tough with Wall Street? Which remains the great mystery of the Obama administration. Why didn't he do what obviously needed to be done with those guys. Why didn't he break them up? Why didn't he fire people? Why
Right.
didn't he, a million questions. Why didn't he do those things? And ultimately it's because, the answer that I came up with is because of a kind of class solidarity among those people, among experts. And you see the same thing at work here. And there's, the mass, what that letter that everybody signed in the Lancet saying that this is supporting their colleagues at the Wuhan Institute, blah, 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 blah. By the way, to take a step back here, it was just 2 months ago that I hate to admit it, I scolded someone for believing in the lab leak theory.
Oh, really?
On exactly those lines. And I did it. Why did I do that? A close relative of mine. And why did I do that? Someone who watches Fox News and had heard it from them. Why did I scold them? Because I believed what it said in the Washington Post. Wow. Right. You better believe me. I'm not going to make that mistake again. I believed what they said. I believed what the scientists were telling me, or what they seemed to be telling me, what the science was telling me, credentialed authority was telling me. I feel like a complete imbecile.
Right. And I do too. And I won't feel like any less of an imbecile if it turns out that it didn't originate in the laboratory. I'll still feel like I took it on faith when I should, to go back to the theological interpretation of this, when I should have been more of a challenger and a questioner. And there are those of us.
Wait, this is not my field, right? I don't do the sort of sociology of science stuff. I mean, I do actually, but I only do it at a second remove. That's what I wrote a whole lot about it in the populism book, because as part of my argument that populism is not anti-science or anti-learning or anti-inquiry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a very interesting field, but I didn't. It takes some familiarity in order to do it. God, I'm getting lost here. The point that
let me bring you back then. Okay. One thing that's been a common thread in both our careers, I think, has been media criticism. And I'm fascinated by the network of beliefs, relationships, financial interests that binds our leading media forces together and causes them to act in lockstep. We've talked about social media.
It's groupthink again.
I'm thinking more of now of professional journalism and not of
but it's the same problem. And I've written about this before. That as the pool shrinks, the number of working journalists in America. I'm going to show you something here.
Okay, now of course our radio people I have to describe it.
Oh, you're not going to do the pictures?
We'll do both, but some people listen on the radio. But all right, it is a picture
of a building being torn down. It's the Wichita Eagle. It's the office of the Wichita
that's a
Eagle
shame.
Being torn down.
Yeah.
It's a painting by a friend of mine who lives in Wichita, and the Kansas City Star.
I wish Orrin Hatch could sing his song. What was that? Let the Eagle Soar or something like that. But
that was John Ashcroft. Come on,
John Ashcroft.
Keep your right-wingers straight.
yeah, they all look the same to me. But anyway,
but the Kansas City Star recently sold their. They had a glorious office building from the turn of the last century. They sold that and moved into this state-of-the-art new building, and they had to sell that too. And the paper is now printed in. Anyhow, it's dying. This is an industry that's dying, and as it dies, the pool shrinks, and you basically have three newspapers that matter. The Post, the Times, and the Wall Street Journal. But we can leave the Wall Street Journal out because they're kind of an outlier in a lot of ways, and it's difficult. They don't have the impact of the other two. This is my old employer, by the way. I don't have the same impact for all sorts of reasons. But what you see with the Post and the Times is this tiny little, the journalists are all drawn from a very, very, from the same socioeconomic background. They all share the same priors. They all went to the same kind of schools. They all have the same viewpoint, the same viewpoint about basically everything. I remember when I was younger, there was a whole genre of journalism that aimed at working class people. I think of Mike Royko in Chicago.
Sure.
And there were entire newspapers like the Sun Times and that sort of thing that were aimed at this entirely different world. And this is lost. This is like, I'm talking about ancient history. It's like so many generations gone. People can't even imagine what that might be like. What's such a thing?
And there was also
like. It's because it's wait. Let me finish up the point here, which is it's groupthink. Again, it's always this is always the problem with these guys. And this is the problem with the financial crisis, is the problem with the Iraq war. This is the problem with COVID, that you've got everybody is drawn from this tiny little group. They all agree with everybody with each other on every last little goddamn thing. The people who are supposed to be supervising them are also drawn from this same group and regard them as peers. It's not a hostile, or not hostile. That's not the word. It's not a relationship.
Adversarial.
It's not an adversarial relationship. It's like they're buddies.
Right. And adding to that, if we want to talk about the newspaper industry, was as you lose the Kansas City Star and the old New York Post and not to mention all the other New York papers and other papers around the country, that whole path, the Jimmy Breslin path of you're a copy boy and, you come straight out of school and run errands. And then pretty soon they put you on the night desk at the local, night court and you work your way up, which made it in large part a working class industry.
Yes, well, that's long gone.
That's gone.
Now you're talking
too.
about like the pre-1960s. There's actually a book called Boys on the Bus about the 1972. We're getting off the subject, but he celebrates the takeover of journalism by professionals. He says because they're so much smarter and they ask the right questions and they look beneath the surface, whereas the working class journalists were so dumb and could never ask the right, they took they just believed what the politicians told them, which is like
did
A, bullshit, and B.
And did R.W. Apple live long enough to see Curveball and the Iraq Story, Judith Miller in the New York Times?
I don't know if he did. Talk about another classic. By the way, my friend Matt Taibbi always talks about Russiagate being this generation's WMD. It's like, no, we've got a bigger one now. If the lab leak hypothesis turns out to be true, oh my God, not a single one of these guys was on the story. The way I got exposed to it was there's a bad word, but the way I got exposed to it is a former New York Times science reporter writing for the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, a highly reputable magazine. But why isn't he writing it in the New York Times?
Right, had a huge impact. That's the story that got you to write this. That's
what got me started, and then I did a little digging and found other stories. By the way, I want to throw one other amusing fact out there, which is talking about the names of pandemics. The one that killed the most people in our world was the 1919 flu pandemic, and they called it the Spanish flu for bad reasons. Because
the Spanish had an open press, and so
where it actually came from.
I think Kentucky or Kansas or some
Kansas, my home state. Kansas flu. Yes, the first case was at Fort Riley, where the army, they have a big army base out there. Yeah,
there really is no place like home. Thomas.
Ouch!
So look, this is a great piece. First of all, so I want to commend you on it. As much as possible, given the subject matter, a very enjoyable read because I so appreciate your style. Let us pray now for science at a New York Times columnist. You were too polite to name her or him, but
and then there's also I used that quote because the title of the story was just so bad. What is the title of the New York Times story? It says
I'd have to click on the link, which
it's I give it in the essay. I say the title.
Yes, coronavirus is what you get when you ignore science. Oh, serves you right. Yeah.
ouch, ouch.
Right.
But I swapped that quote in to replace one from Nancy Pelosi, where she said, "Science." There are so many of these in the early days of the pandemic. She said, "Science is an answer to our prayers."
That's we could spend a half hour just unpacking that sentence.
But the rampant confusion of science with the divine,
theology,
the Almighty,
of course,
is so fascinating, and that's the link between this pandemic and the one in 1665 that you and I were talking about, the Journal of the Plague Year pandemic.
Well, I've written about this, but Cotton Mather, the Reverend, Puritan, yes, tried to bring inoculation to 17th century Boston because one of his slaves taught him how to do it, told him about it. So he started to inoculate people against smallpox during the smallpox plague in Boston, and they firebombed his house. Because the idea of, so much for science and religion cohabiting peacefully. They were so terrified that they thought he was out of his mind to, and not get people sick in order to end the spread of the disease. He was going for herd immunity.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, anyhow, so I'm both. We didn't talk about how this is going to end, because I think you tried to out cynicism me, and let me just go ahead and outflank you there, which is that I think that even
challenge,
if this,
my friend.
Even if this turns out to be true, we are going to brush it off in the same way that we managed to brush off the financial crisis. Do you remember what they would say? Oh, it was a perfect storm. Who could have seen this coming? Right. We don't need to do anything about it. So guys got one wrong. So those guys, these are experts that you're talking about here on Wall Street. Their heart's in the right place. They were doing their best. Who could have known? Remember that phrase?
But sure,
who could have known?
Ben Bernanke said, nobody I knew saw this coming. And now the rational response would be, maybe you need new friends, if nobody. But no, that's just, of course, you're right.
That's how they'll try to brush it off. And there, and
I will out-succeed
probably
you.
True. There will be no. Also, look, it's just too inconvenient.
I will out-citizen. Okay, they will succeed. They will succeed
in what?
In brushing it under the, brushing it off and continuing as if nothing happened. I'm certain of it.
Yeah,
I wish I weren't, but I am.
I mean, the other thing is, I'm very concerned about a trade war with China or something like that, and I really don't want. I mean, this is so scary if it turns out to be true in so many ways. Increasing hostility with China is one of those ways. But the part of this, once you start reading about this, and we didn't even go into the problem of what is the research called, gain of function, which is what they might have been doing. It's a very dangerous form of research where you take an existing virus and you make it more virulent. You do various, you fiddle around with it in the lab, and it's thought to be a legitimate, form of research. And it's done here in America. It's done in Europe, and we suspect it was being done at the laboratory in China. And the thing is that it was just a matter of time until, all of these labs are fiddling around with incredibly dangerous stuff. And there are lab leaks all the time. We know that. It's just a matter of time until something like this happens. And, I'm now saving up new, projects to work on during the next pandemic.
Well, all right. That we'll let that be your last word. And mine will be this. If this story turns out to be true, at least we will have exonerated the pangolin, which I think
yes, that poor creature
got a lot of blame for something totally out of not its fault at all. So Thomas Frank, whose latest book is The People Know, thanks for writing this fascinating column. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Richard, it's my pleasure, as always.
Excellent. You still have a better radio voice than I do. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and we'll be right back after this. This is The Zero Hour.